ladies and gentlemen and all other genders present here today. My name is Katja Schnellecke. I'm a policy advisor for international gender justice and feminism at Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, which I will abbreviate in the future with FES because it's just a lot easier, based in Berlin. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this parallel event at the 67th CSW in New York for a gender transformative digital New Deal. Just a few housekeeping rules at the beginning. So we're videotaping the session. So if you don't want your voice to be heard, please don't ask any questions in the Q&A. You can address us bilaterally after the session. We're also taking photos. Our lovely photographer, which you can identify by amazing strawberry summer earrings, will be taking photos. If you do not want your photo taken, please just let her know. Also, if you don't want to be in any of the videos and you feel uncomfortable, just stay further in the back of the room. Veronica is kindly doing Spanish translation over there. So if you need Spanish translation, please go to your right-hand corner of the room. Last but not least, there's going to be a Q&A towards the end of the session. So we have quite a few changes on the panel throughout. If you have any questions to a specific speaker, please just scribble it down and we'll come back to you at the end of the session. All right, with a focus on innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for achieving gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls, this CSW offers an immediate opportunity for taking a look at impact of digitalization and to start a concrete conversation on visions for digital justice. Accelerated digitalization of economic activity presents both opportunities and challenges. Platform-mediated interactions can bring economic opportunities for peripheral geographies and women if public policies and investments are actually able to keep pace. However, despite the transformative potential of digitalization, the mainstream platform economy reflects and reproduces gender exclusion in labor markets along intersecting axes of age, geography, class, race, and caste. Women who are marginal farmers, informal workers, or small producers face exploitative working conditions and a livelihood squeeze in the digital global value chain. The current dominant order of the digital age has intensified exclusion, extractions, commodification, and capital accumulation. As welfare delivery and emergency cash transfer programs also went digital by default with the COVID-19 pandemic, the world's poorest women and girls fall through this critical security net. The enormous market power of corporations and big tech have captured national governments facilitating privatization through the promotion of tech solutions in public services, as well as avoiding tax obligations and manipulating trade negotiations to guarantee monopoly rights, leading to greater inequality and feminized poverty. In parallel, massive deregulations, intensification, and precariousness of labor across digital transformation. Sorry, just got completely lost. In parallel, massive deregulation, intensification, and precariousness of labor across digital platforms, digitalization, and telework are changing the world of work and greatly impact women in the informal and formal economy, including in public services. Although the AI revolution does bring exciting prospects to revolutionize production system, the fastest growing and highest paid jobs in the emerging AI economy are characterized by a wide gender gap. Low-wage work, historically dominated by women, is also most susceptible to technological displacement in the digital revolution. AI and algorithmic profit use also push for the commodification of women's sexual and reproductive health through increased digital monitoring and surveillance that datifies women and girls and undermines their human rights. Last but not least, technologically mediated violence also intensified in the post-pandemic period, disproportionately affecting women human rights defenders, women in politics and in the media, women workers, LGBTIQ+ women, women from the ethnic minorities and indigenous communities, and women living with disabilities, undermining their socioeconomic well-being and public participation. No gender transformative change will be possible under these conditions. Against this backdrop, I'm here with you today in the audience, as well as our partner organizations PSI, Dawn, ActionAid, Oxfam, the Center for Economic and Social Rights, the Global Initiative for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, the Tax Justice Network, Womankind, Femnet, FES and IT for Change, who have joined forces to call for a digital New Deal. We are gathering here today members of trade unions and feminist movements in a global conversation to put together a common agenda for a gender transformative digital New Deal. We'll use the opportunity to also look at two existing initiatives. First of all, the Declaration of Feminist Digital Justice that was launched by Dawn and IT for Change earlier this week. And later on, we'll also look at the Charter of Feminist Demands for a Global Digital Compact for Gender Equality that was launched by FES and IT for Change yesterday. My colleagues have or will hand out flyers with QR codes to you for both documents, so you can check them out later. The gender digital access gap is not just the gender digital divide is not just an access gap. It is also a democratic deficit that hinders meaningful participation of women and girls in all the diversity in the emerging digital paradigm. We'll discuss and explore our common approach to framing a digital New Deal, connecting it to the Declaration of Feminist Digital Justice and the Charter of Feminist Demands for a Global Digital Compact, and visualize a joint future and common coalition working for a gender transformative digital New Deal in order to ensure an inclusive and equitable digital future for all. I want to use this opportunity really quickly to thank Veronica from PSI and Rosa for having me here and asking me to moderate today's session. It's an absolute pleasure. And I also want to thank all allies, movements, and unions for joining and engaging in this discussion today. Before we start, I'd also invite you to accompany the session on social media using the hashtags Digital New Deal, Gender Transformative, Feminist Digital Justice, and CSW 67. Sorry. Now it's time for you, Rosa. I do not think that you actually need a vast introduction because everyone knows you. You are the General Secretary of the Global Union Federation, Public Services International since 2012. And in 2016, you're also nominated as Commissioner at the UN Secretary General's High-Level Commission on Health Employment and Economic Growth, representing the trade union movement, health workers, and public services. Thank you so much for being here today, and we're looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks to all of you, particularly to all our partners with whom we have been working hard to promote this initiative, and that helped us to accompany the work that we are doing during this UNCSW. Some of you may have heard me on Monday when we had the launch of the declaration. I'm not an expert on digital issues, but I'm a trade unionist, and I've been able to monitor, to look at the situation in these past years when the digital transformation, the digital transition started to took place and to take place heavily in the world of work. Well, it was, of course, it could have been, of course, an opportunity to reduce the workload on individuals and particularly on women. It could have been an opportunity to reduce the working hours for all. It could have been an opportunity to reshape the idea of work, including the fact that our communities have to deal with the digital transition, with artificial intelligence, helping people to live a more sustainable life, and including also the fact that working to protect the environment is not something different, and artificial intelligence and digital transition could help in that direction as well. Tanya already mentioned many of the issues that are related to this situation. And what we saw in the reality is that if not nothing, very little of this happened in the past year. And our concerns is that the more we go ahead with the digital transformation, the more we will see a restriction of workers and human rights. There are several reasons for this. I would try, in a nutshell, I would say, to highlight what I see as the main problems. I think that the main problem is the system of global governance that we have. And I think that experiencing this UNCSW, we can agree that the current UN governance system is not up to the challenges that we have. And it's not up to keep the promise of its foundation principles. The penetration of multinational corporates within the governing system, the governance system broadly at global level is influencing deeply the decision of governments, but even the decision at global level. And it's not a mystery for anyone that more and more we see that the projects that are going to be developed by the different agencies of the UN are responding to the vested interests of corporates rather than to the interests of people they should serve. The second aspect is that this penetration of the financial capital, the neoliberal system, the financialization of the economy is pushing more and more to have, insist on the extractive economy affecting the environment, affecting women, and fostering the idea that a virtual economy can be more profitable for those who are rich and make more profit than the real economy based on productive and reproductive work, which is what we think what we put also at the basis of our demand for a reorganization of the care work and the care redistribution. And finally, I think that the experience that we had during the COVID pandemic can provide us many arguments, many reasons to say that the virtual environment it has been able to respond to the first real need that we have to keep in touch, to continue to do our work and to maintain the connections in our networks, with our members, with workers, but it has not been able to deliver the well-being that we could have aspired to have, at least. We saw the growing impact of domestic violence on women, the increased workload on women, the digital divide with women who have the possibility to access internet and technologies, and those who couldn't, who had no possibility to do that. And I would like to add another aspect that I don't know if this is just my perception or if something that really happened, But during the 3 years of virtual meeting we had with all the UN agencies, I'm thinking to the UNCSW now, but I'm thinking also to the ILO conference, to the WHO General Assembly, to the WTO negotiation and General Assembly as well, where we saw the IOM, the Migration Forum, where we saw a real restriction of the democratic space, where NGOs, yes, we were allowed to participate, but we have never been allowed to have a look at the list of the participants, because that was close to the UN official participants. We have never been able to have a voice and really interact with the global governance, which means that there's been a reduction in our possibility to democratically influence the decision of these bodies. This is why I think that talking about a digital transformative New Deal is something that we really need to do, and we need to do as a collective effort. Because if we are not able now to change the status quo and to give a push to an alternative development of the digital community, and I'm not talking, because I'm sure somebody else will do, about not only the protection of data, but the ownership of data and the know-how of public administration and governments that we need to continue to keep in public hands, we are going to shape a future that will be for the richest, for the wealthiest, that will not bring justice and equity, and that will affect women more than ever. So I leave to the more experts to introduce the different aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rosa. I now have the pleasure to introduce you to Yiping. She's a Dawn Executive Committee member, a Chinese feminist, author, and activist. She co-leads Dawn's sexual and reproductive health and rights activities, and she also participated in creating several vibrant women's NGOs in China after the 4th World Conference on Women held in Beijing. Yiping, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to your introduction.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for the invitation. This is my great honor to speak, but I feel like I shouldn't be here to speak. It's the wonderful work of my other colleagues, Nandini, and from IT for Change, and Flora from Dawn, has leading this development of this feminist digital justice declaration. There's more postcard outside the room, but there's a few on the table that you are welcome to take, and you can scan this code and get all the information and the wonderful work they've been doing. So it ends up that I'm the one who's going to speak on this topic that was built on the excellent work and coordinated by the other two feminist colleagues here. So I think my task is give an introduction about what it is, the Feminist Digital Justice Declaration. What is the content, what's the process, and what we can take it from here to the future, and how to link it to this important agenda, the Gender Transformative Digital New Deal. So I think that is where the purpose of being here and get together for brainstorming together. So let me begin with a little bit background information about this initiative. So this initiative was conducted between the August 2021 and March 2022, all during the pandemic time. And Dawn and IT for Change had co-convened a working group of 36 feminist scholars practitioners from Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin America, centered on two critical questions. So this is two questions that motivated this discussion and this initiative. The first one is, how can we halt the data extractivism and reclaim the emancipatory promise of digital and data technologies for gender justice agenda? How we stop them from doing the wrong thing and advancing a feminist agenda. The second, what the vision of feminist digital justice that we seek to outline. So we not only stop the wrong agenda, but we also want to forge into a more feminist vision. So this is very important. So with this vision, the working group had created the background paper of the critique of this current regime's problem, and also developed a declaration. So everything is online and available. We make it available, and it's also translated in different languages, I believe. So there's the 4 pillars in this declaration. The first one, I think, is 4 pillars as covered economic, social, political, and governance issues. So the first pillar is feminist digital economy. So what is a feminist digital economy should look like from the feminist vision? A new rule of law-based AI paradigm that committed to eliminating social cultural bias in AI system and promoting the creation of a public value and ushering in redistributive justice in the AI economy. And alternative models of platform form that transfer power to women-led and worker-owned social and solidarity enterprises. Unlike the capitalist platform model that now is dominating and overhanging our daily life. So that is the vision. And also, in the feminist digital economy, we also vision an intelligence economy that humanize labor, not robotize or dehumanize human, and that enables the realm of work to be reconstructed at the site of self-actualization. So you're not machine, you're not dehumanized. You don't feel like you're a human being when you're was dominated by this so-called platform economy, and also the public benefit and social inclusion and ecological sustainability are as a key ground norms for the new digital economy. So that's feminist new digital economy vision. On the social and on the social aspects and social pillar, a digital society should be based on the reciprocity and the solidarity, moving away from the centralized server-client paradigm of the mainstream internet platform, currently the platform, towards a plurality of community networks that enable the flourishing of multiple ecologies of belonging, akin to the organic intelligence of underground forest networks. So this is a kind of tongue twist, but I think our following speakers will elaborate, what this should look like in the realm of the world of work, in the reality. And the public resource must be dedicated to development of such feminist communication infrastructure to reclaim the digitally mediated public sphere for the surveillance from the surveillance capitalism that you have already mentioned. So this digital in society, grounded in the feminist social contract, I think it will emphasize this should be a public common and public good, not private owned. It should be in the institution that safeguards for the sustainable equality and no form of sexual and reproductive surveillance against any group of individuals by the state. and universal social security system should be put into place. And we already have technology can work for that purpose, but actually they were working against this purpose. So lastly, the feminist paradigm for digital governance. I think Rosa has covered how important the governance issue. Without this issue put on the high top of the agenda, all the other issues cannot be achieved. So we need the data sovereignty as a constitute of the right to development and the feminist digital constitutionalism. So so that's just by concluding. I think how we begin. If we are looking forward to a rights-based framework, and that extend the rights with justice, where we should begin, and for the next step to further the declaration, the principle that's outlined in declaration. I think we should begin with establish a solid ground of the framework that combine the equality, justice, and accountability. So I think the first battle is how for this transformative digital New Deal is how we how we get back this narrative. The narrative that the civilian state has promoted is that they try to selling to us that the people need to give up or compromise their rights for the safety. So you give all this information, the facial recognition, so that we can protect you, then you'll be safe. You reduce the crime, etc. So that's the language that the state has promoted and tried to sell, and the corporate sector trying to brainwash us with their narrative, and we should give up our privacy for convenience, for the services, for the pleasures. So what's the feminist narrative in this digital New Deal? I think we should think about what is the principles that we should put forward. I think that's what the question I want to put on table. I think how we combine the rights, the human rights, accountability, the sovereignty, autonomy, and the justice. So that's the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this gives us a lot of food for thought already. I would now like to invite our next three panelists to join me. For those of you who joined us in the audience a little bit later, my name is Katja. I'm from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and facilitating the session on the invitation from PSI. And you're not losing the opportunity to ask Rosa or Yiping any questions. Just jot them down. We'll have a Q&A closer to the end of the session. Also to let you know, if you came later, we're having a photographer, so if you don't like your photos to be taken, just let her know that you don't want to be in any pictures. Okay, so we'll start our panel where we want to look at the linking of the Declaration of Feminist Digital Justice that we just were introduced to with the Gender Transformative Digital New Deal. So what are the next steps? What are the concepts that we're looking at? And I'm joined here firstly in the middle by Meghna Abraham. She is the Executive Director for the Center of Economic and Social Rights, and she is a proven and respected human rights leader. From the Global South, has a 20-year track record of developing successful research, campaigns, and advocacy to tackle major economic and social rights issues. And I'm also told you have a passion for challenging inequality, environmental change, and corporate abuses of human rights. I'm very interested to hear more from your work and how this connects both to the declaration and also the suggestion of a gender transformative digital New Deal. You have 3 minutes, and we're looking forward.
Thank you, Katja. I can definitely solve all of these issues in 3 minutes, given my considerable passion. So I think I think the other speakers have already very comprehensively pulled out the challenges. I know that the speakers after me are going to continue to do so. I think the key question that I would like us to focus on is what is the role of human rights and what is the value of what we've called the enabling human rights-based approach in this particular context. And I think we should just, I could talk to you about a lot about international human rights law. I don't think that's what's actually helpful in this context, and definitely not in 3 minutes. So I think the key issue for me is how do we view human rights? Do we see them only as a sense of a limited set of safeguards that have to be built in, that have to be built into models once they are developed? And the models, let's be clear, and I think as Rosa has pulled out very clearly, the models are built on the basis of what is profitable. So the models, when we are discussing, as Rosa was saying, well, we're always looking at all developments in new technology and saying, but they have the potential to be transformative. But were they developed to be transformative? Or were they actually developed based on a market neoliberal model, which is about getting the greatest amount of profit from it, which is not necessarily about the transformative potential. Often that is a completely accidental or maybe side thing that we are sold. What is developed is not developed for that basis. And I think the question, therefore, I think the key question, which I know most human rights people would be hesitant to ask, but is the key question really, if we look at, so all of these issues we talked about, we know that on education right now, there is a whole generation of girls who are completely lost. I'm from India. It's anybody who thinks that we're getting that generation of girls back after COVID because of the impact of the digital divide, we are kidding ourselves. Yeah, we know that social security systems are being regulated by, and often on a discriminatory basis, access to technology, sometimes deliberate, sometimes because of the inequitable access to technology. So we look at all of these issues, and we have to ask ourselves, that key question here, do we come at it and we say, oh please, when you're a private school provider and you're providing digital technology, let's build in a little bit of safeguard, let's have a little bit of accessibility and affordability, and so we throw a bit more money and you'd have some poor children come in. Or do we question the fundamental model itself? And that goes to whether certain technology and models should be allowed at all without thinking through these aspects from the beginning. And what is scary about this is I know digital is new to all of us, but this issue is not news to all of us. We're sitting right now in this place, New York, 1907, Bakelite, the first form of plastic, was commercially produced and marketed. At that point, there was absolutely no thought put into the disposal of plastic, or whether it was even possible. So now we are fighting for a plastics treaty to deal with the consequences of plastics. And we're talking about the same thing with digital, we'll be talking about the same thing with killer robots, and we're going to be talking about the same thing with carbon dioxide removal technologies, which are going to have devastating impacts in the global south. So this is the question for me. What is the fundamental objective of digital technologies? Is it development? Is it gender equality? Is it equitable access? If that's not the objective, then everything else that we're looking at with the Global Digital Compact or any of these formats is not serving the purpose that we want. And I think that is the key here. Who benefits, both in terms of access to the technology and from the revenues? And I know my colleague Liz Nelson is going to pick up taxes, and that's a key issue right now in the context of all the crisis that we are facing. Who has the right to tax digital revenues? Who controls the technology? How do they further the rights and interests of women, especially those facing multiple forms of discrimination, marginalization? Now, I think we could, since our time has been cut, I won't get into detail. Obviously, obligations of international cooperation and assistance are key, and they have to be translated in this context very specifically. They must be looking, I can go a number of examples, maybe perhaps in questions, but what we must focus on here is the redistributive potential of human rights. And I think this is the key issue. The role of the state in determining how technologies are developed and used, whether they're being used to actually rebuild the social organization of care and to reduce the deeply gendered burden of unpaid care, how revenues from technologies are distributed through taxation in particular, and the responsibility of the state to be in the driving and regulatory seat, not just deferring to the market power. So I would just say this is, I think, just one key thing to say, because I know there's a lot of hope in the UN treaty system, and I'll finish with that, Katya, is I've spent a lot of my career fighting for due diligence. I know it's a very useful standard. I'm unfortunately also forced to say it is not enough. The corporate model keeps evolving beyond whatever safeguards we put into place. So I would just say to all of us, practically, the issue that before us is a strategic one. We can take the fight to the model, or we can choose to believe that it is not sustainable to fight the model and then just try building in safeguards. obviously, the Center for Economic Social Culture, Center for Economic and Social Rights, I can't even say my own organization's name so quickly, but it's all about the rights-based economy. But whatever you call it, I think this is the big choice to make when we're discussing this issue.
Thank you so much, Meghna. I think we need a longer session to tackle all of these interesting points in depth. So thank you for making an effort to be so brief. And I hope that we'll have time to follow up in the Q&A on this later. I'm now joined by Wangari Kinoti, a Pan-African feminist activist engaged in global policy advocacy on women's economic justice and structural gender-based violence. Over the last 16 years, she has campaigned and implemented programs through civil society and social justice organizations covering women's political participation, women's land and natural resource rights, corporate accountability, women's paid and unpaid labor, as well as violence against women. We're very happy to have you here, and I also give you three longish minutes, and we're looking forward to your input.
Thank you so much, Katya. And let me just double check that we have. I'm just double checking that we'll have a second chance to come back. So I'll say half of what. Hopefully. Okay. I'll try and say half of what I was going to say, and then I'll say the second half later. So thanks so much for the chance to contribute to this conversation. It's a timely conversation. It's critical. I agree with everything that has been said so far. I'm going to focus on women's labor, as I like to do, because women's labor, despite it being the labor that sustains households, sustains communities, economies, sustains life itself, despite this, across the spectrum, women's labor is undervalued, it is often invisibilized, and it's also taken for granted. Whether this labor is paid or unpaid, whether it is care work, and non-market work. And I would add, when it comes to women's work in the so-called informal economy, which I prefer to call the popular economy, because by calling it the popular economy, we're disrupting the fallacy that that the informal economy is somehow marginal, right? While in fact, it is how the majority of households in the world earn their livelihoods. And it accounts for 61% of all employment globally. In Africa alone, up to 90% of women are in this form of employment. So it isn't informal, it's popular. And of course we know that many of these jobs are in the sector are care jobs. I like that the declaration on feminist digital justice talks about the need for an intelligence economy that humanizes labor and enables the realm of work to be reconstructed as a site of self-actualization. The platform, that platform architectures must be appropriated to create and nurture societies in which the labor of human subsistence and social reproduction is not subsumed in the logic of capital. This is extracted directly from the text of the declaration. So, as Katya mentioned, I'm with ActionAid, and we recently did a study on women's economic rights and the gig economy, which we're calling for now platforms of precarity. And by the gig economy, here we mean where online platforms connect workers with one-off pieces of work, right, or gigs. So we focused on 7 countries across 3 regions in the global south. So the countries were Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, Brazil, Guatemala, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. And we will be sort of releasing a policy report based on this study sometime in April, hopefully. We're working on that. So why did we want to study this? Because as we know, many governments are rolling out strategies aimed at harnessing the opportunities digitalization can create. We know this, we've probably heard that this all week, including in the world of work. So in Africa, for example, the African Union has a 10-year digital transformation strategy designed to reap the benefits of the 4th Industrial Revolution, right? And this is also supposed to support the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, or the AFCFTA, which, if implemented as envisioned, the AFCFTA will be the biggest free trade area in the world, connecting 1.2 billion people and covering 55 countries. We do know the gendered impacts of trade liberalization, and folks like the NAWI AfriFem Macroeconomics Collective and others are doing some really important feminist analysis of the AFCFTA, which is good to look at. And of course, we're not, that's not the sort of the subject of our conversation today. But yes, governments across the globe are focused on harnessing technology and digitalization. I've used the Africa example, but the same is true, you know, in Asia, in Central and South America, and really everywhere else. So anyway, the fourth industrial revolution, which was coined by the founder of the World Economic Forum, which some may describe as an undemocratic global bastion of neoliberal ideology. I didn't say it, some may. So the fourth industrial revolution is really being driven by the rise of the digital economy. And as we have probably been hearing through the week, the digital economy is indeed growing exponentially. I won't go into the numbers because Katya is looking at me. So in summary, okay, so we do this study, we're looking at the digital economy, which includes the platform economy or gig economy, right? So what do we find very much in summary? What did our study find? One, first of all, women are reporting positive impacts. We expect that, right? So I didn't have work before, I now have work, I have an increase in my income, so on and so forth. There's training, I have an increased sense of professionalism, etc., etc. However, and this is true, I'm really rushing here, the broader picture is much less positive, right? So the reported benefits are undermined by the reality of working conditions that are characterized by precarity, low and unpredictable pay, long hours, limited access to social protection, denial of rights to unionize, exposure to violence and harassment, lack of corporate accountability, so on and so forth. I mean, we're looking at a situation where labor platforms classify workers as independent contractors, right, or partners, which basically allows you to circumvent, minimum wage or other statutory obligations, including social protection. So in other words, and this is three, what is happening is that the gender, class, and race-based exploitation women face in the traditional world of work is basically being replicated in the gig economy, with and accompanied by new forms of discrimination and corporate control. So also jumping a lot of other stuff. It's really about, and of course, we're saying that the size of platforms, companies, and conditions they provide to workers varies. We know this. However, broadly speaking, this unchecked expansion of corporate power is enabling the exploitation of women as cheap app-based labor, further entrenching power dynamics rooted in racial and sexual division of labor, and very importantly, in the case of multinationals, and a few people have mentioned this before me, based in the global north in particular, maintaining relations of coloniality. I will stop now. I really do hope to come back because I have more to say. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we're moving on to my colleague on my right-hand side, Amina Hersey. She's the head of Gender Rights and Justice for Oxfam International, a global network which fights inequality to end poverty and injustice. Amina is a gender justice and human rights practitioner who specializes in changing narratives and redefining security. And she also had led several international organizations, including Amnesty International, in feminist influencing, policy, advocacy, and campaigning. Amina, also 3 minutes for you.
I will try. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to start my intervention by sharing an example from my country. I come from Kenya, and a few years ago, our previous government announced that they would be delivering 1.3 million laptops to school-going children. The project would cost about 600 million, and that was the entirety of the educational strategy and budget. To prioritize transforming the educational system to e-teaching and e-learning is what they said. All this comes against the backdrop of really poorly funded schools, where many do not have desks, books, sometimes even classrooms, but also very poorly paid teachers on really bad salaries and a shortage of teachers in general. This program was piloted and rolled out in partnership with private sector, and at the time there were no policies to address support to teachers, parents, and children on how to utilize laptops, but also whether in the classroom, but also at home. I share this example because technology and digital integration must be never just a tick box exercise. And it shouldn't be the preferred solution as well to facing societal issues and the lack of services and infrastructure. We see over the world, over and over again, this happening. So the same was witnessed during the pandemic, where vaccine access was available. However, you had to register through a portal to actually get it. And that means most of the people who are living within the margins of society, so refugees, people who do not have documentation, people in rural areas, no one, poor people who do not have access to phones or laptops to actually sign in or how to sign in, were left without access to the vaccines. And this has to do a lot with austerity measures. And this is part of the intervention that I want to give. The interlinks between austerity and digital rights. Austerity, like digital rights, exists within the intersect of patriarchy-fueled neo-colonial capitalism. And I know there's a very many systems of oppression to deal with, but it really is, ends up, at the sharpest end of exploitation for women, girls, and gender diverse people. And they're left to cope with, as Wangari just said, precarious and unprotected low income work, while their underpaid care remains completely invisible. Today, as more than 85% of the world is living under austerity, and with 70% countries cutting funds to education services. That means access to education for women and girls is devastated by lack of public funding. Any discussion about integration of technology should not be without discussing cuts to public services. And the girls who are and will remain out of school if education bill was not reduced or eliminated. This is on top of the existing risks that are associated with the use of technology, including online violence, abuse, and the lack of digital protection for the girls and women, and which further locks them out to their rights to education. And for many countries, we see increased, shift to digitalization of public services. This insistence of technological innovation often carries an enormous risk of privatization, privacy, security, and we must ensure that we're equally prioritizing the adequate funding to public services and promoting digital rights. But for many feminists and for many people, activists who they have been doing the work, reimagining, developing, advocating, and implementing alternative economic models, frameworks, and strategies. It's been ways of how we organize, engage in economic activities, and push alternatives to the mainstream. And we've had a lot already with this new contract, but also in different spaces. So I think what we need to do more is push for the accountability aspect. And this is what you were mentioning earlier before. How do we get to start actually holding our governments, our leaders to account to this reimagination and feminist alternatives to the work that we do? I think I kept it on time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are now joined by Liz Nelson virtually in a second, but I think, I'm not sure how you feel, but I'm getting a little starstruck up here. I've just had so many very important interventions. I would love that we have more time, and I think it's time for a round of applause for PSI for bringing us all together here. Thank you. All right. Liz Nelson is director of the Tax Justice Network and leads work on program of collaboration between tax justice and human rights advocates in initiatives of practical application and including regional and global researchers, advocates, and campaigners.
Hello, my name's Liz Nelson. I work for the Tax Justice Network. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know you have many fantastic panelists in person with you today, and I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to briefly set out the means for financing digital sovereignty, including how we can combat tax avoidance and tax evasion by digital corporations. It's a massive and complex issue, but we shouldn't be too daunted by the technical intrigue of tax, because justice is almost entirely a political issue. The enjoyment of rights and the well-being and progressive development of women and girls is dependent on states curbing the exclusionary and extractive nature of digital economy. So what has tax got to do with it? The extractivist model that motivated formal empire also has laid the basis for the digital sector to continue extraction unabated. I wanted to briefly just set out the role of tax and how it can mitigate that extraction, which has been happening under the new digital economy, where the likes of Apple and Amazon are able to extract the lowest effective corporate tax rate of almost any multinational companies. Tax justice sets out different roles in which it can be progressive. First, to raise revenues to fund public services sustainably, for redistribution to curb overlapping inequalities that deny human rights to women and girls and other marginalised groups, to reprice public goods and bads such as tobacco consumption and carbon emissions, and also to provide a broader policy package to prevent social harm, for representation where tax underpins state-citizen relations in such a way as to promote responsive and accountable government. Now, elite resistance to more tax justice measures is the central obstacle to progressive redistribution. In a state of tax justice, women and girls have the power and the information to demand effective political representation, but that delivery depends centrally on progressive taxation of income and wealth and the regulation of finance and monopoly power in the public interest. The ability of governments to pursue progressive taxation in line with public preferences depends in turn upon a global tax architecture that ensures all countries are fairly heard in rulemaking and in standard setting. The estimated $500 billion of revenues lost in total each year to cross-border abuse by multinational companies and wealthy individuals creates huge incentives for those same actors and their tax advisors, including the digital sector and international law firms and banks, to lobby intensively for both the legal space and the social permission to continue to undermine the states and societies where they make their money. For this reason, international tax abuse, and indeed the whole range of illicit financial flows, are dependent upon financial secrecy. That secrecy and the wider conditions for tax abuse only exist because of the continued willingness of jurisdictions to provide them. Necessary progress rests on the normalisation and the delivery of the range of tax justice policy measures and institutional reforms. The core platform, known as the ABC of tax transparency, is really critical. Automatic information exchange between jurisdictions identifies undeclared offshore accounts. Beneficial ownership of companies, trusts, foundations, and partnerships. While there's progress there on beneficial ownership, it still lacks robust verification and many loopholes continue to exist. Country by country reporting by multinational companies is necessary to reveal the misalignment between where their real activity, economic activity takes place and where profits are declared for tax purposes. Now, two key supporting planks of the domestic policy agenda provide for disclosure and enforcement of tax justice, and together they are crucial to ensuring that taxes are applied fairly and are perceived to be so by the wider public. And that in turn is crucial to the degree of tax morale and tax compliance without which the social contract can quickly unravel. And my final point about global governance of tax in the 21st century requires a genuinely inclusive and representative forum at the UN to replace the rich country members club, the OECD. These transparency and governance measures can reset the platform by which women and girls and others most marginalised can flourish within a transformative and progressive digital age. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Nandini and Kelsey to join the panel, and we'll follow up in the Q&A section with another round. All right, now I'm joined by Kelty Cameron. She's International Solidarity Staff Person at CUPE International, Canada's largest trade union. She has a Master's of Social Work from Carleton University in Ottawa and has been a community and international solidarity activist for almost 2 decades. Kelty spent several years organizing with the Immigrant Workers Centre in Montreal. Kelty, welcome. And like everyone else, you unfortunately only have 3 minutes, please.
That's fair. Not fair, but fair. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and to all of the impressive list of organizers that were read out earlier. That was nice to hear. And also, I want to give a shout out to all my trade union sisters who are in the room. I think there's a lot of you here. From the ITC Education International, of course PSI, the Canadian sisters, and sisters from all over the world. The comments I'm making, I only have 3 minutes, so I'm going to talk fast, but I am, even if I had an hour, I'd be scratching the surface. So I am hoping that others in the room will be able to fill in the blanks, fill the gaps with information, and also disagree with me if you like. That would be fine too. You know, the essence of the, first the declaration I think is really great. It's a really great analytical tool and a really perfect blueprint for our collective action. The essence of the digital transformation is power. And who are the owners, who own the platforms, the algorithms, the data, the surveillance equipment, and who doesn't, who's benefiting, who's not. And when we think about the role of trade unions, the reason we exist, the heart of what we do is to shift the balance of power in our society between workers, between workers and capital, and in the interest of the most marginalized, the ones that are most affected by this digital transformation and the imposition of digitization on our lives. In terms of a common approach for trade unions, which was part of the question that was asked, I think there's 3 fundamentals, which I don't think anyone will disagree with in the room, and that's the need for the public ownership. Access is not enough. It's ownership that is the goal. The centrality of the state, and that's regulation of the corporate sector, but in some cases it's to take over the corporate sector. So take the place of the corporate sector. And then the other is genuine democracy and what that looks like. One of the unique tools of the trade union movement and trade unions is our collective bargaining agreements. And that tool and the process of collective bargaining negotiating can anticipate and mitigate the impact of digital technology on workers and women, and by extension, the public. So we have specific issues, specific areas of work that are affected that by extension affect people in our communities, healthcare tracking systems, utilities, water management, smart cities, education sector, e-government, and all that entails. Collective agreements can safeguard principles that are in legislation, but they can also serve as normative standards where legislation is lacking, and that's part of the cumulative impact of individual agreements. Employers are increasingly automating, imposing algorithmic systems to hire, fire, manage, monitor, discipline workers without their knowledge. And of course, it's the women, most marginalized workers that are most affected by that. On the point of legislation and regulation, collective bargaining is not enough. And so it goes without saying that privacy legislation, workers' health and safety, anti-monopoly legislation, public procurement are some of the biggies. That's not exhaustive. But for example, public procurement is an example where public unions or public sector unions can be particularly informative and instructive for lobby efforts and also lending expertise, because in many workplaces, I'm thinking Canada where I am, it's the public sector workers who are involved with the government procurement policies and processes. So there's a lot of expertise on the front line. And then also, of course, public sector unions and the union movement generally, not just the public sector, are on the inside and the outside fighting against the privatization and the hollowing out of the public sector that's occurring because of the imposition of undemocratic digitalization. A critical site of struggle that is coming or is happening is obtaining a digital trade policy. I'm looking at you. And the need for a trade policy that doesn't undermine government's ability to regulate, that protects workers, the public sector, that enforces labor rights legislation, and that protects sensitive data, of course, health, biometric, national security, law enforcement, all of which have devastating impacts on the most marginalized. And so trade unions have, in coalition and collaboration with social movement organizations, made efforts and gains over the years to struggle against the corporate capture of these free trade agreements, and specifically challenging their the way in which they're used to expand corporate power. And unions will be involved in the ongoing struggle for a just digital trade policy. Finally, last point, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention organizing when I talk about the labor movement. That is, singularly the greatest source of power we have is our ability to collectively act. And unions and workers, worker-led initiatives and trade unions have been organizing creatively around the world in spaces where they are highly exploited by digital technology. And we're seeing, the gig economy, outsourced home-based workers. I'm sure there's others that can speak to this meaningfully, who are organizing, and that's ultimately how the balance of power will be shifted in our favor, and that will be that will determine our capacity to transform the digital economy in our favor. So I will leave it there. There's other examples that I would love to hear about and say more about, but I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Kelty. I would now like to invite Nandini Chami for her remarks and for the presentation of the Carta of Feminist Demands for a Global Digital Compact for Gender Equality. Nandini is Deputy Director at IT for Change, and her work focuses on research, advocacy at the intersection of digital policy, development justice, and gender equality. She is part of the core team working on policy advocacy for data justice, inclusive digital trade, gender perspectives in the debate on ICTs as means of implication in the SDGs. Nandini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katya, and thanks to all our colleagues, especially the PSI colleagues. I just want to say that let me first introduce the Charter of Feminist Demands from the Global South, that tell you a little bit about the effort, and then connect that with the agenda we are all collectively discussing today, which is about a gender transformative digital New Deal and how that relates. So in 2022, IT for Change and FES, in partnership with the Asia Pacific Forum for Women, Law and Development, Access to Knowledge for Development Center of the University of Cairo, Research ICT Africa and FES Syndical, convened a series of regional consultations in the Global South involving nearly 100 feminist academics, scholars, trade union representatives and other civil society representatives to look at the normative directions and action agenda on how we can decode what's happening to the digital paradigm from a feminist perspective and then co-develop feminist visions of our shared digital future. So the Charter lists out these feminist demands in a conceptual framework, and I would like to point out that the Charter speaks to one problematic that was actually articulated by all the speakers who preceded me today, and that is this, that when you look at mainstream discussions on gender and digital technologies, including in the CSW negotiating text that we are all seeing, we notice that there is this push for gender inclusive digital innovation, but nobody is asking the question, inclusion into what? So then the result is that you have a situation where there is a techno-solutionist, ICTs as tools type of approach, where we're just like thinking that the technology is getting developed, so let's add and stir the gender agenda into it, and then let's correct like algorithmic bias and discrimination, for example, without actually looking what are the algorithms for, who owns them, whose profit like it is derived from the algorithm, and so on and so forth. So essentially, when you begin the conversation from the other direction, asking the question of inclusion into what, we start recognizing that the digital is not like a value-neutral technology. It's actually a structural force that is reconstituting the market, the public sphere, the state, and all the structures of economic and social power, like you also said this earlier in your intervention. And if we have to really have a gender transformative digital New Deal, then we have to approach the intersectionality lens from a structural perspective and actually reshape the digital structures so that it is not capitalism that is driving the trajectory of the digital platform data and AI innovations, but something else and a new political economic regime. So from this starting point, in the Charter, we actually have three key demands. And I'll just speak about two aspects which have not been touched about earlier, but before that I'll just give you a summary of the key demands. So the demand number one is about how we have to ensure the accountability of transnational digital corporations for protecting women's human rights, both civic political rights and economic, social and cultural rights. And a lot has been said about it, so I will move on to the next issue. And this is about the fact that when we are thinking of a socially just digital transition, and this has become a buzzword we increasingly hear, this will not have any meaning unless there is a feminist digital justice approach that is transversal in all the multilateral regimes of trade, taxation, even intellectual property, and looking at labor rights and all these things. And this needs to change. And the third point is about how do you actually reclaim the internet as a communications agora from the jaws of surveillance capitalism, and you actually look at data resources and a new order for this. And this is the issue I will just speak about a little bit. So when you look at data resources and data governance today, there is an understanding that as long as personal data protection is taken care of, then nobody asks the question of who does that aggregate data belong to, right? The default assumption is that the private platform or the capitalist can enclose it and use it for perpetuity. And this is the fundamental problem at the heart of all inequalities in the digital order. So if we have to change this, there is an idea that if data and aggregate insight is social knowledge, this should be treated as the knowledge commons of society. But then, increasingly in the UN system, whether it is in the Committee on Food Security or the World Health Organization, you hear this discourse of data as a global public good. At first instance, this seems a very feminist idea. But then when you probe deeper, you see that this is actually a very dangerous idea, where if the infrastructural capacities to mine intelligence from data are not available to all the people, then this will only lead to a situation where free flow of data flows benefits the powerful platform elite. And this is what we must overturn. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini. I will now hand over the facilitation baton to you, and would like to invite the panelists to join the panel again. I'm going to disappear and go around the room with the mic, so if there are any questions, please raise your hand, and I'll be right with you.
Okay. Trying not to be awkward in this transition. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes for open discussion, Q&A, and maybe we can hear a little bit more from our speakers. So what I would like to do is just ask you to put up your hand, and I will take note of, and I may ask for support to make sure that we see everyone's hand in order. And I would ask that when you make your remarks, maybe just quickly introduce yourself, the organization, if you have one, and also to keep your comments brief, not because we don't want to hear from you, but because we want to make sure that we hear from as many people in the room as possible. So I may ask you to wrap up your comments, but please know that that's not because we don't want to hear what you have to say. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4. So Janaea in the back, if you could go first, and then the sister beside her, and I see you there too. And maybe what I'll say is we could take maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll turn it over to the speakers to respond. And you're gonna.
We're gonna do a consecutive translation from Portuguese to English, and then from Spanish to English for these two.
Ok? Junéia Batista, sou do Brasil, Internacional de Serviços Públicos e Confederação Sindical Internacional. Eu cheguei um pouco atrasada porque eu tinha coisas do Brasil resolvendo, enfim. Mas dizer o seguinte, o pouco que eu peguei das falas das companheiras, que foram as nossas expositoras, eu me dei conta o seguinte, mulheres, nós temos que fazer a revolução novamente. Não podemos esperar que eles venham nos vender como a carne mais barata do mercado. E se nós formos mulheres negras, seremos ainda mais escravizadas. Então, o momento é agora. Acho que essa conferência é muito importante para que acenda o sinal de que o mundo digital não pode nos aprisionar, não pode nos escravizar. Então, eu acho que a gente tem uma grande oportunidade, essas 2 semanas, eu vou embora amanhã, mas essa semana foi super importante para que nós, militantes, sindicais, feministas, movimentos mistos, tomemos consciência, voltemos para os nossos países e vamos organizar as nossas mulheres. Era mais essa sensação que eu tinha, eu precisava compartilhar isso com vocês, que é uma coisa de toda semana que eu passei aqui. Obrigada. Deu, né?
Thank you very much. My name is Junéia Batista from Brazil. I am part of the Public Services International delegation and also with TUCA, the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas. I'll just note as well that Junéia and our other 2 sisters that are here present in the room from Brazil are also members of the Brazilian government delegation, and so will be participating in the negotiations all of next week. So Junéia is saying that she apologized for coming late. We've been with the negotiating internally in the Brazilian government delegation this whole week. She said that us, women, we need to promote and provoke a revolution. that we can't wait that the same people that are trying to sell us and our rights as the cheapest meat available on the market resolve this problem for us. There's a particular dimension about race that we need to keep at the forefront that Junea is bringing up. She said that this week has been really fantastic and an important conversation in getting all of us who are fighters in our own countries to focus on digitalization and the impacts of digitalization and how we can intervene strategically and collectively to regulate and improve conditions for us, that we all go back to our home countries more motivated to fight and to organize the sisters in our own countries. And that's the work that all of us have to commit to doing once we return home after this great week together.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Memory, and I'm with Femnet. I'm just curious. Thank you so much for bringing this. I'm just curious in terms of what can we do about the workers who are displaced, who have not been paid, and what do we do, because we know that the ownership, I think we talked about the ownership of most of these accounts and these economies, digital economies, are in the global north. And how do we put protection mechanism, especially for our countries, to be able to even collect tax? But also I think what's concerning is where do they go in terms of the way we already have mostly women who are not even unionized. They're being displaced by boards. We just learned yesterday that a bank in South Africa, one single bank replaced 3,000 workers with AI. And where do they go? Because what mechanisms can we put in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of how do we get the connection between the human rights, the workers' union, and the feminist movement to really have solutions to protect and mechanisms for redress for all this? And also looking at the women who were also displaced in their workplaces during COVID. You know, I think there are all these gaps in terms of what can we do and how do we even go back and make sure that they get their redress, because right now we don't seem to see the mechanisms.
Thank you. We'll take one more question and then we'll turn it.
Gracias. Mi nombre es Loreto Vallejos. Soy de Chile. Participé en la redacción de la nueva Constitución, que fue rechazada en septiembre pasado. Y estoy muy emocionada de escuchar el concepto de justicia feminista digital como una necesidad para la protección de la democracia que falló en mi país. Hoy estamos en un proceso capturado por los partidos políticos en Chile, donde personas como yo soy profesora, independiente, no vamos a tener la posibilidad de defender el feminismo, la democracia, a las mujeres, a las niñas. Es muy emocionante para mí, estoy muy emocionada de escucharlas, me siento motivada. Hemos sido canceladas en nuestro país, estamos solas después de este proceso, pero creo que la unidad de Latinoamérica y del mundo en torno a la justicia feminista digital nos puede llevar a superar este proceso en Chile, que se perdió, pero que creemos que es posible mantener en el tiempo juntas. Mi pregunta es, y me gustaría a lo mejor que lo compartieran, ¿cómo la justicia feminista digital apoya a la democracia y es un atentado a la democracia cuando no existe acceso a información veraz, a información correcta en nuestras comunidades? Las mujeres en Chile no pudieron decidir informadamente y eso hizo que nuestra propuesta fuera rechazada en Chile. Así que estoy muy contenta. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad.
My name is Loreta Vallejos from Chile. Loreta participated directly in the constitutional process, unfortunately, which was voted down in Chile, but was a direct participant in that process. She said that she's really moved emotionally to hear so many people talking about a feminine digital justice that this is really important and that she agrees that this is really a priority. She's talking about the process in Chile. The political process is being captured by political parties, and that's some of the reasons that we see these kinds of losses, like in the example of the constitutional process. Loretta is a professor and she's independent, and so she said it's very difficult to collectively defend democracy and the importance of democracy, that she feels a little bit isolated in Chile, but is really moved and excited by the strength of the discussion, the quality of the discussion around feminist digital justice, and that despite this feeling of isolation and this capturing of the political processes by parties, that it's possible for us to build and to stay together. And so finally highlighting the question at the end from Loretta is, how can we defend democracy when women and girls don't have digital access to accurate information? She said it's impossible to win without having a real access, and so we need to focus on that. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the speakers. Could we just see a show of hands? I know I have a sister here, and there's someone that had their hand up. Okay, so there's 2 here, 3. All right, so we'll turn it to the panelists to talk about the need for revolution. The question about what can we do about displaced workers, unpaid workers, non-unionized workers, what kind of mechanisms are needed nationally? And then also the final question, how can we defend democracy when women and girls don't have access to technology?
I will address the question on revolution. No, but I just want to say, and first of all, thank you to everyone for the remarks and questions, especially the sister from Chile. We were in Chile in December for the really, really important gathering, a historic gathering called Our Future is Public, where we're really defending public services, and this is really part of the conversation that we're having today. But I wanted to say that we can talk about platform capitalism, and I think we've kind of done that, or sort of digital capitalism, but we also need to talk about digital colonialism. And I think there's been sort of some allusion to that in different ways so far. So for those of us who are invested in decolonization and decolonial strategies in all aspects of our work, as I am certainly, those strategies need to stay on top of the new forms of imperialism. And this is what we're talking about here. And I think Nandini has also alluded to that. How is data being extracted and commodified? Who is doing it, right? It's colonial institutions, it's multinational corporations working for this sort of imperialist system. How is this different from the historical colonial processes of domination, of extraction, of exploitation, and of oppression? And what are the implications for social justice, right? So whereas we could sort of organize through trade unions, there are a lot of trade union people here today, and consumer movements against capitalist sort of exploitation of labor in this digital age, who do we organize against? Who do we not negotiate with, right? Where do we do it? Some scholars and activists have described sort of the big tech companies as the 21st century equivalent of the 19th century companies that established control over parts of, different parts of different continents that were colonized on behalf of imperialist states. So, I'm from Africa, so I'll talk about sort of Imperial British East Africa, Royal Niger, German East Africa companies, right? So this is the equivalent, but also the mad rush to sort of develop digital infrastructure as equivalent to the construction of imperial railways that were constructed to aid extraction. So it's just about sort of drawing those parallels with colonialism, and I think we need to talk about that. But I think it's to say, as we're calling for the narrowing of this digital divide, right? So all this sort of talk around inclusion, or indeed narrowing the gender digital divide, we have to pause and think, what's the bigger picture here, right? To what end? In what ways might this further damage our socioeconomic and political landscapes? We have to sort of zoom out, look at everything together, organize across issues. Are we reforming? Nandini talked about adding gender and stir. Are we adding women and stir to something that's innately unjust? So are we reforming, or are we making a collective agreement to dismantle and to reimagine. And I think that's what I would really like to leave us with, which is that we have to reinvent ourselves free of manipulated colonial structures, colonial discourses, colonial identities. We have to employ anti-colonial, anti-racist, capitalist and feminist approaches to challenge and overturn the world order. This applies to the issue of digital technology and its ability to both empower and disempower, just as it applies to all the other social justice issues we're confronting today. Revolution.
So, thank you very much. Well, I know how passionate Junea is and how she is engaged in trying to motivate women and women workers to join our campaign. Yes, indeed, we are here talking about the fact that we do not need to adapt to the situation, but we really need a deep change. And I must admit that for some time the trade unions have been a bit shy in approaching the issue of the digital transformation, as they have been in debating the issue of the climate change and protecting the environment. Because of course, we are here to defend work, to promote workers' rights, and when you lose your job, you have no right. That, of course, is a concern that we need to keep in mind. But it's not simply talking about adaptation that we can change the situation. We are not going to change the power relationship. We are not going to change or to reduce the conflict between work and capital. Not at all. We are simply trying to put some pad here and there, while we need to have a transformative idea of the society. And I think that revolution is exactly that. We are not calling to bring weapons and go and on the street on that. We need a change, but this means that we need to be very vocal when we talk about the current governance systems. You're talking about decolonialization. I totally agree with you, but this means that we, as the workers and women, have to raise the voice anytime that OECD or our governments within the governments that are members of these OECDs, and they are not only the very rich government, there are also governments from the south that participate in the OECD, continue to dictate the global agenda, and they are dictating the global agenda in the interest of the richest countries. That's what is happening. And we need to be aware, for instance, the OECD is eroding even the role of many other UN agencies, talking about health, talking about tax, talking about labor, talking about a series of governance and public administration, a series of issues that have to continue to be in the hands of a democratic multilateral system. That is not what we see now. So the participation of women, in my view, is what makes really possible a deep change. Of course, we need the will to promote this change and to promote it without compromising. That doesn't mean we don't need to find an agreement with the other, but we need to be clear in our principle and what we know and what we want to achieve. And about what we do with workers that are going to be displaced, that lose their job because of the introduction of artificial intelligence and technology. Well, I think that the problem is exactly this one. either we use technology to reduce the workload and to change the perspective of what means work and labor. We do not have to live to work. We need to work to live, and leave space to our life. That's what we need to do. And I think this can be used, the digital transition can be used as an historical opportunity to reduce the burden on workers and on women of work, and share time, change professional perspective, change the idea of careers. That's something that would be possible. And I think this is the idea of an alternative development and more sustainable development that we need to achieve socially, economically, culturally, environmentally, and that's what we need to do. I'm not sure we will be able, or we are ready to do all this, but at least we need to try to get it.
I'm going to be very brief because I think other people need to use the room. So I think definitely, I agree with everything that the speakers, in fact, everything that people on this panel and the interventions from the floor. I think everything that is said here is key. I think just very quickly, just to pick up a couple of points. I think on Wangari's point of colonialism is key there, and it's important to remember that those companies historically were backed by states, and we have to stop falling for this idea that the companies are operating outside of state support. All of this colonization is happening with support, particularly from governments in the global north, but also with governments in the global south being captured. I think we have no doubt of that, and so we need to focus on that. So on that, I just want to point to a couple of things here. One is that I think, picking up on the points that Liz and Rosa have made, we need to break the silos, because everything that we are discussing in this issue, colonization, financialization, the impact, all of this applies if we switch to environment. It switches if we look to privatization in other spaces. So I think one of the key things for me is to take these core issues, and I think, as Amina said earlier, take them strategically to the different battlegrounds. The process that's happening, kicking off hopefully in the General Assembly, looking at tax, if that stays a technical process, none of the things that we are talking about will come to the table. So this issue can't stay at CSW, it can't just stay at the digital spaces. It has to go, we have to go space by space, and we have to hit at the model. And I think just on the point of the issue of the workers, and I think that's key, that's a practical issue, I think doors are being opened up through climate litigation that we need to strongly follow on corporate, on other forms like labor. And again, that the key issue that we want to hit at is actually notions of liability, notions of shareholder primacy, notions of fiduciary duty. The day a director of a company can be held liable for unpaid wages in Kenya or India, I assure you, if a director can be held personally liable, the world as we know it changes fundamentally.
Just with time, I'm going to just say one thing that I think hasn't been mentioned, and thank you for actually saying that, because I was going to give that intervention. The only thing I wanted to add, I think, is I think a public informed and aware of their rights, whether it's digital or human rights, are able to make better informed choices about what to adopt, how better to hold governments accountable, and to hold power, to challenge power when it comes to issues around privilege that we all see. And I think just to add on to that, I was reminded today about one of the key things that we really need to highlight is, in terms of our feminist principles, is the aspect of care. We all are working so hard, de-siloed in our own narrow spaces, and with solidarity, with care, with focus on love, joy, and support, with the imagination of a better future, we would absolutely be able to tackle all this and really center a feminist digital divide. I say that wrong.
We understand.
Deal, yes. Thank you.
Okay, we are at time, so I want to apologize for we don't have time to I'm sorry, sister, we don't have time for many.
I want to ask some practical things.
Practical?
Yes, two practical things.
Practically, we're
Practically.
6
My
minutes
name
over.
is Maria José Robertino from Argentina, and I want to know how would we continue these debates returning home if we can organize with you some local debates in the same line and everything. And the second is with this declaration that you have written, if we can add, we can sign, or practical things. No, I have many things to speak, but I can't now, but later.
Thank you for that. That was a great question, and I want to thank all of the questions we received and for the eloquent responses from our speakers. We have obviously lots more to say. I'm going to give the mic to Rosa for some concluding remarks, and maybe you can speak to that question.
Yeah, I don't think that there's nothing to add to what has been said, and all my colleagues here, my sisters here have already contributed. I think there's a lot of meat on the grill, and we have to work together, to continue to work together to make more I don't know how to say, but I would say impacting our policies and our perspective. I would like to just to conclude by saying that your question is exactly what we need to say right now. Of course, all of us, I guess, all our organizations are open to continue the debate at the national level with all of you, with your organization, to help growing the movement. That's essential for us if we want to succeed. And of course, I assume that the manifesto, the declaration is open to receive new people signing, organization participating in that project. That's the aim. We launch an idea, we launch a project, and we hope it will grow around the world and in the different nations. My suggestion, I hope it's shared by all of you, is that today we put the seed of this work, and in a reasonable time we are going to convene another meeting where all together we will decide how to make effective our proposal and how to being able to construct, to build a real movement that will impact on the decision of the global organizations and our national organization as well. I hope this is enough. Well, I know that sometimes we say we convene a meeting to decide that we are going to have another meeting. That's not the case. That's not the case. We had a deep discussion today. There's a lot of things that are already clear in our idea. Now it's time to say how. And that is what we will do next time. Thank you so much for being here.
We're all showing up like yes.
Thank you, Wanda.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Picture.